Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we are going to talk about breathing. And we're posing a question right off the bat. Can breathing cure anxiety and depression? What do you think?
Do you want my answer now, or should we wait?
No, yes or no right now.
Okay.
Just yes or
well,
no.
It's not going to be a yes or no. I think it can help improve it.
Yeah,
I think
agree.
a yes or no is too simplistic. But
Agreed.
can it help improve those? Yes. I think.
Yeah.
And I think by the end of our podcast tonight, hopefully our listeners will understand how that can be.
You're right. Yes or no is most definitely too simplistic answer, but breathing does cure death. So, I mean, all good things.
Okay, you've got a point there. Yeah, if we don't breathe, we die. But I think it can be very helpful, and I think there's a lot of really good evidence out there for really paying attention to how we breathe. Yes,
exactly. So a lot of our information for this week's episode comes from the Huberman Lab podcast. And so he has on a lot of guest speakers, and all of his guest speakers are experts in their field.
Right.
So I want to briefly explain who Andrew Huberman is and then who his guest was.
Mm-hmm.
So Andrew Huberman, so he's an American neuroscientist and podcaster. He's an associate professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at the Stanford University School of Medicine.
Right. And I have something to say about him. Why don't you talk about Jack Feldman, and then I'll go back to Huberman.
Okay. So he has on guests about, various topics. And one week he had on a guest, Dr. Jack Feldman. And so I want to give you a brief bio of who Dr. Jack Feldman is. So he's a distinguished professor of neurobiology at the University of California. He's also a pioneering world expert in the science of respiration or breathing. So they do a 2-hour episode, and this episode will be listed in our show notes. And all they really do is talk about breathing. And so the episode is titled Breathing for Mental and Physical Health and Performance. Now, I'm going to give you a heads up. It's very technical.
Oh, yeah. But all of Huberman's podcasts tend to be that way.
They're
do. Pretty dense,
yeah.
And they also tend to be pretty long.
Yeah.
2 hours, 2.5 hours. But I think that a lot of good information. I certainly recommend that. So I have listened to Huberman for a while, and he has a very large following. Maybe some of our listeners listen to him as well. I think it's important to acknowledge that about 4 to 6 weeks ago, there was an incredibly negative article written about him in a publication called New York Magazine. And it's an interesting read. I'd recommend, if people are interested in him. But it doesn't necessarily look at his intellect or the ability, his podcast, the content of his podcast. It's very much focused on his personal life. And apparently he is a nightmare to be in a relationship with.
Interesting.
And he's unmarried, never been married, but the article talked maybe 3 or 4 of his former partners, and it's very negative. And apparently he is very tough to be in a relationship with. It also pointed out some discrepancies that I want to acknowledge. He apparently so he's a professor at Stanford. He doesn't even live in Palo Alto or in Northern California. He lives in Southern California. So I don't know how that works. And then when he talks about his lab, he will often reference his lab or the work being done in his lab. And the article pointed out that at this time, the lab consists of one student who is really being self-guided. So in some ways, he's not being accurate about what he's doing that way. I don't think it changes the importance of the information that he puts out there. And as he says at the start of every one of his podcasts, his goal is to get that current scientific information about various subjects out to the public at no cost. And he certainly does
Yes.
that.
Yes.
So there are podcasts where he's just talking on his own. And I would guess he has a fairly large staff that does all the research. He's not doing that himself. It's just too in depth. But I think that the ones I like, the podcasts I like, always have guests on.
Yeah.
And like this Jack Feldman, I thought was really interesting. So that's all I'll say about Andrew Huberman. Just be aware that there's a lot of negative press out there about him very recently. And then I just want to say for our listeners, I think the most interesting podcast is one on olfaction. And if you go listen to that, it's how we smell, and it is fascinating.
Okay.
And it's a researcher he's out of the Weizmann Institute, which is in Tel Aviv. And so he's the guest speaker, and it is really, I've listened to it a couple of times because it's so fascinating. Okay. So that's Huberman.
Okay. Yeah. So we're going to take this incredibly dense and technical podcast, and we're going to simplify it, because I'll be honest, I struggled with parts of it, right? Or just
yeah, so do I.
Yeah, I mean, because these guys they're experts in neurobiology, and I mean,
this is all they do. This is all this guy does. He only looks at breathing. So can you imagine your whole?
Yeah.
I think it's been mostly his whole career has been spent on breathing. So he's going to know a lot about it.
Right, and probably forget that people don't just automatically know things, because there was several times where Andrew Huberman was like, "Well, okay, why don't you explain what this means?"
Yeah.
Because I mean, this is all this guy does. Okay, so another reason why I wanted to do an entire episode on just breathing, I mean, is because it's one of those things that I think, take for granted, or at least we take for granted how much of a positive impact it can have on your life when you focus on it and do it right. Because breathing is something you do automatically, right? You don't have to think about it. And so when you stop and you take the time to think about your breathing, and you take the time to just focus on it, it has a huge impact, or it can have a huge impact on your just whole body, right?
Yeah.
And I think it can also have a huge impact on your fight or flight response, because breathing can really bring down stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we've talked about meditation on, I don't know, many different episodes.
Yes.
And I talk generally every day. I'll have a couple of clients where we're talking about meditation. What's important to remember, this might be true for many of our listeners, a lot of people don't like it.
Yeah.
And they'll actually say to me, I can't do this. And I believe that it's so annoying to some people that they really can't do it. That for some people, like if you're doing a guided imagery, to sit and listen to something actually ramps them up a little bit. And so I believe that that's true.
Yeah.
Meditation is not going to work for everyone. And so what I've started doing is shifting away from meditation and just focus on the breathing. Because at the end of this, I hope our listeners will understand, I think you can actually the research supports it.
Yeah.
You can get as much benefit or more from doing like a half hour of breathing than as you can doing meditation. Now, it's a certain type of breathing that we're going to talk about. And so I just at the start of this episode, I want people to understand this is a really good alternative to meditation if it really bothers you to do any type of meditation.
And the great thing about breath work, and we're going to refer to it as breath work, but I really think breath work can have a very, very broad range. So if you just stop and think about your breathing, and just think about, physically slowing down your breathing, that's breath work. And the nice thing is you can do it anytime, anywhere, right?
That's what I like about it too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like if you're driving in the car, if you're sitting in class, no matter where you're doing, you can just focus on slowing down your breathing, or just focus on the way you breathe and how you breathe. And it has a very calming effect.
And see, that's a huge advantage over meditation, because that wouldn't be true with meditation. You can't do it in most places. You have to be in a quiet place, sitting or lying down. And so that's what I really like about breathing. And for people who really do like meditation, it works for them. I think you can look at breath work as like an additional thing, like an
It's a
additional
supplement.
tool. Yeah, an additional tool that you can use when you may not be able to do the meditation. And so breathing is one of those bodily functions, kind of amazing, where it happens automatically. And in addition to that, we can also control it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's not true for many of our bodily functions. So
Right.
I I think it's amazing that we get to have that control over the breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing too is breathing that we don't think about is breathing directly affects your heart rate.
Yes. Yep.
And so the faster you breathe, the higher your heart rate. The slower you breathe, the lower your heart rate is
Right.
going to be. And, so it just even, and you'll start to notice that even if you just do it just several times a day, 5 times a day, even and you can be doing anything. You can be walking, you can be sitting, reading, anything. If you just focus on just some slow breaths or just
Right.
take a deep breath and then just try to slow your breathing, you're going to notice that your stress levels are going to start to come down because you are forcing your body to regulate itself.
And this is a good segue into what does it actually mean to have a deep breath? Because
Yes.
I will say often to people, I won't warn them what I'm doing. They're sitting on my couch and say, okay, go ahead and take a deep breath. And what they do is they'll usually puff up their chest.
Yep.
Now, for me, that's a shallow breath.
Mm-hmm.
And a deep breath, some people call it a diaphragmatic breathing or breath. And all that means is you're breathing down with your diaphragm. And so, because the diaphragm, in this podcast, he talked about the diaphragm. And it's kind of an amazing muscle. I think you'd call it a muscle that when I think, don't know the movement that the diaphragm makes, but in some way it creates this negative pressure. And that's what lets air come in to your lungs. And so for me, I was trying to think, about how could I talk to our listeners about what a deep breath looks like? Because usually, and I'll be doing all these things with my hands and they can't see my hands, but I'm going to try and describe it. So here's the way that the listeners can see if they're doing a deep breath or a diaphragmatic breath. And so if you put a hand on your chest up high by your breastbone, is that what they call it?
Breastbone, sternum. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right up there. So one hand up there, and then the other hand down really on your stomach, lower rather than higher. And so if you just breathe normally, most people have what I call a split breath, and both their hands are going to move a little bit. If you have and some people have a very shallow breath, and that means the hand on your chest is going to move. And those people who have a shallow breath all the time tend to be the ones who have a little bit higher anxiety.
Yeah.
And then the way you know that you're having a deep breath, and the way you can imagine this is like pushing your stomach out. Now, your air obviously is not going in your stomach.
Yeah.
But that's the best way, I think, to feel it and to imagine it. And so you can actually breathe. So go back. You have both hands, one on your chest, one on your stomach. You can actually breathe without your chest moving at all. Now, for some people, it comes easily, and for others, they really have to work at it. But you can do it.
I have not been able to figure it out. No matter how hard I try, I can't breathe without making my chest move.
So you
I'm
just have
serious.
To, I don't know. You can't see.
Yeah. Okay.
You can't see me now, but see my chest. But the hand on my chest is not moving at all, and it's just my stomach. Let me see.
Hang on. Just a second. Okay. Hang on. Let me pan down. Okay. See.
So go ahead and. Are you trying to do a deep breath?
Yeah.
Well, push your stomach out. Don't push. Like when you breathe, push your stomach out. Huh. It takes practice.
Yeah, I have been. Oh, I've been doing this for weeks. Yes, I've been doing it for weeks, and no matter what I do, and I mean, I have a short torso. And so I wonder if that's it, or I don't know, or maybe I just thought, I don't know, but like no matter what I do, I can, and I've been trying for weeks now since you first told me because I think weeks ago you mentioned that when you breathe naturally, your chest doesn't move, only your diaphragm moves.
Right. And that's because I've been doing this for very long time.
Yeah, but it's like, but no matter how hard I try, no matter what I do, even if I'm laying all the way down, my chest will move when I breathe. So
I
I don't
think
know.
it's
Maybe.
just about focusing, going slowly,
Okay.
and so not fast, but
Yeah.
a slow, very measured out and
Okay.
in. And so the advantage of this is one, it slows down your breath,
Hmm.
and a lot of I think most meditation, I think I can safely say this, that most meditation are going to have some sort of breath work
Yeah.
involved in them. And often, and I think this is true for yoga, it's going to be taking a deep breath.
Hmm.
But I think one of the issues is a lot of people don't understand what it really means to take that deep breath. And so it's really having your stomach go out, which is not really what's happening, but your diaphragm. And so people who play woodwind instruments
Mm.
generally do this because they
Okay.
have to. It's
Yeah.
the only way.
Yeah.
It's the only way. Not woodwind, but like saxophone as well. What is that? Reed
Clarinet.
instrument?
Oh, a reed
Maybe
instrument. Yeah.
maybe reed
Yep.
instruments.
Hmm. And I
They
used to, I used to play a clarinet too. So I don't
did you?
know. Yeah.
Because
And
most people have to do that just
yeah.
because it's a way to get more breath. I don't know if
Mhm.
singers do this. I suspect
They
that in
do.
some way that they are doing this.
When my roommate in college had a focus on vocal performance, and
Hmm.
that was one of the things that she talked about was diaphragmatic breathing and how important that is for singers to get that full deep breath from the belly. And that's one of the first things that choir directors often will do walk through is just breathing from the belly because you are getting more breath. It
You're
sounds
getting more
counter
air. Yeah.
Yeah, you're getting more air. It sounds counterproductive or counterintuitive, but that's really what it is. And, I think another reason maybe why I struggle is because my whole life I have tended towards more of an anxious personality. In
Hmm.
fact, one of the things that I have been consciously working on that is a very, very deeply rooted habit is holding tension in different parts of my body,
Right.
mainly my
Yeah.
shoulders.
Hmm.
My face, my eyebrows and my jaw. So as I hold a lot of tension. And so one of
Hmm.
the things that I have been working on is just when I notice that tension, just just mentally saying, okay, relax the body. And that
Yeah.
may be why I struggle so much with taking those deep breaths.
It's probably that, Liz, more than
Yeah.
anything. Because,
Okay.
as I said earlier, those people who have that shallow breath tend to be the
Hmm.
ones who are a little bit more anxious.
Yeah.
So that's a deep breath. And then we've talked about physiological size, which I think they do discuss in the podcast. And I've explained that before, but there's a study that came out. They meant
Hmm.
reference this in it's called Cell Reports Medicine. And they found that 5 minutes of physiological size per day can be more effective at reducing stress and improving mood than mindfulness meditation or other breathing techniques. Now, they say it's better than box breathing, which we'll go over. So, if you think about what is the physiological sigh, it is in through the nose, two breaths, and what you want to do, your lung is full of these sacs. I think
Yep.
there's thousands and thousands of these sacs called alveoli. And what you're doing is you're puffing them up. So you can think of you're taking in enough air in through your nose twice, holding
Yep.
it to blow those sacs up, and then you're letting it all out as much as you can through your mouth. And
Hmm.
so you do that. I thought it was interesting. I never knew the reason why you uh, puff up twice, but
Hmm.
apparently those sacs, the physiological reason is that they tend to stay closed because there's water in them, and so that surface tension that comes with water makes it hard for them to pop open, and so you're
Yeah.
actually popping them open. But I think that also what breathing does in general, and I'm pretty certain with the physiological size is you're rebalancing the oxygen and the CO2 in your body.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit more about the importance of doing that. So the physiological sigh, we all sigh, I think they said we all sigh automatically about once every 5 minutes.
Which was really surprising to me. And then I started thinking about it and I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah. Now that you're thinking about it, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
recognize, oh, I do sigh. And again, it's just that automatic deep
Yeah.
breath that you feel
Mm-hmm.
like you need to take.
Right. And what your body is doing naturally then is trying to rebalance the CO2 and the O2. it happens automatically, but then again, you can, consciously put your body into that mode of breathing
Yep.
with the physiological sigh. I first heard about this from Huberman, last year sometime. And I have since been telling clients about it. And again, it doesn't work for everyone. It certainly is very helpful for those people who do it. And they
Mm-hmm.
say it's pretty amazing. Just that breathing, just the focusing on the breathing tends to decrease the anxiety.
It does. And again, that's something that, I've noticed. So there has been an excess amount of stress in our household this
Right.
last week. So there was no episode last week because my son ended up in the hospital again for the fifth time in like 4 months. During that time, I was definitely neglecting, kind of the self-care, right? All of my focus and all of my energy was going into a sick child. And so I was feeling just this mounting stress, mounting tension. And I was like, man, I almost felt like that drowning sensation. And then it occurred to me, oh, I haven't done any type of breath work at all in days. And so I just started just throughout the day. And I have been go, go, go from sun up until, here we are at almost 9 o'clock at night, my time.
Hmm.
And just throughout the day, when I've been driving, when I've been sitting, even when I was exercising, just focusing on breathing.
Hmm.
And it brought my anxiety level down 10 notches. And part of it
Yeah.
is because I have been doing breath work for a while now, right? I've been doing this for several months. And
Hmm.
so I am in that mode. So don't expect to get results just, right off the bat, right? Don't expect to get
Right.
results tomorrow. It's one of those things that takes consistency, which is hard for us. But once you do it, you're going to notice a really big difference.
Right. And what I want to say about that is that I've said it about meditation. A lot of people, if their life is going well, then they tend to
Yep.
slack off on the meditation, or if you're doing breath work. And that's the time when you really need to do it. And the reason is because you make a habit of it and your body really gets accustomed to it. And
Yeah.
so what happens is we know this works, that you can, if you've been taking those deep breaths for long enough, your body knows, oh, okay, I'm going to calm myself down now.
Hmm.
And so it really helps when for in those times when you are anxious,
Yeah.
that you already have this skill and that you aren't trying to learn the skill of
Yes.
breathing while you're anxious, because that's
Hmm.
just not going to work very well. And so when we talk about the brain, that we've talked about the amygdala a lot, and the amygdala can affect breathing either fast or slow. And like, so for example, if you're anxious or a panic attack,
Yeah.
for example, for people who are having a panic attack, what their breathing does is it tends to go very shallow and it can go very fast. And so I think, what I remember from this podcast that we're referencing is that the amygdala is being triggered in that way and it causes the breathing to go faster.
Hmm.
But the opposite can also happen, in that if you really focus on slowing your breath down and
Hmm.
doing some of these things, then it's going to have a positive effect on your amygdala. I think the way information travels going both ways. So breath can affect the amygdala, amygdala can affect breath as well. And it's a two-way street between that breathing. And as we've talked about before, the amygdala is the center of our emotional states. And so that's, when you said just a few minutes ago that slow breathing has decreased your anxiety,
Hmm.
that's exactly what's happening, is you're having this positive influence on your amygdala. And I know in past episodes what I referenced this, and I want to say to listeners, this is not actually what's happening. This is just the way I visualize it, and that is that the amygdala gets inflamed,
Hmm.
and that's how I visualize it. And I think the slow breathing then tends to calm the amygdala down
Yeah.
and decrease the inflammation. So the changes in CO2 in our
Yeah.
body can affect the pH level in our body and our brain,
Hmm.
which can have a negative effect. And I think also it influences our emotional state and how we're feeling. in the moment. And so that's another reason to use these breathing methods, and especially that physiological sigh, to rebalance the O2 and the CO2, because it actually changes the CO2 in your body and brain.
Yeah. So another interesting thing that I wanted to talk about from this episode was this idea of hyperventilating yourself to calm yourself down, which,
So I don't know a lot about that,
okay.
but I know people who do it. And again, it's what you're doing. If our listeners want to look more into that, what you're doing is you're changing your physiological state
Yeah.
by breathing, right?
Hmm.
And so we know what you're doing is you're changing the levels of the CO2 and the O2
Yeah.
in your body by doing the hyperventilating.
Hmm.
So I have never done it. I don't know anyone who does it. I
Okay.
do know that there are people who practice it.
Yeah.
I think that is it Wim Hof? Is he one who does the hyperventilation? I don't know if he is.
I don't think it was
No,
Wim
that's
Hof.
controlled. No, that's
Yeah.
controlled breathing. So again, honestly, I don't know much about the hyperventilation. I don't think they talked about it in the podcast, did they?
Yeah, they did.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Hmm.
I missed
Yeah.
that. Do you remember
So
what they said about the hyperventilation?
just that it was effective at helping reduce anxiety.
Well, I
So
think you'd have to read up on it, maybe have
yeah.
someone help you through it so that you don't faint.
Yeah.
Because I think
Yeah.
I th- I think that's one of the things that could happen is you could faint, which you don't want to do. Um,
Right. So yeah,
so
it's something to be careful with. And anybody who's ever had a panic attack, or I'm sure we've all had that experience as a kid, or seen a kid so worked up that they're
yeah,
hyperventilating, where it's that
yeah,
like it
right.
feels like you can't breathe. You get that sensation. That's not a fun and pleasant sensation. So
No.
I can't understand why I'd want to do it on purpose.
Well, plus I think there are better ways
I
to
agree.
actually calm yourself down. Um,
Yeah.
but again, I had to acknowledge I don't know much about it.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it. Let's say that.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like you're hitting your thumb with a hammer to distract
Yeah,
yourself from the pain of the broken leg.
right. There
That's
you
kind of
go.
what it feels
That
like
would
to me,
work.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, sure. Now you're not thinking about the broken leg, but
right.
well, now your thumb is smashed. So, all right.
Uh,
So before we run out of time, I want to just quickly go through the different types of breathing practices that are out there.
Okay, I know we've gone on too long, haven't we? Let me just
We
talk
always
about
do.
depression. I know. So they talked about depression, and I thought that Jack Feldman had this really interesting observation. And here's the visual image that he had. It's like when you're depressed, you can think of yourself as just walking in a circle. You're just wearing it down, and it's like you're wearing this path in the ground, and it gets deeper and deeper. And
Hmm.
that's why I think it's very hard for people to pull themselves out of the depression. Now,
Yeah.
his contention is that 30 minutes a day of slow breathing over time starts to fill that path up and helps you pull out of the depression. And
Okay.
I really believe that. I think
Yeah.
that, we focus a lot on medication, which has its place,
Hmm.
but I think that here's the reason a lot of people don't follow through is it takes time. And we're talking
Yeah.
about 30 minutes a day. And
Yeah.
a lot of the people that I see, I'm lucky if I get them to do it 10 minutes a day.
Right.
And so I think you can have positive results doing alternative things, what we might call holistic things like breathing, and get without the side effects. Okay, so different ideas. Box breathing. Here's the idea with box breathing. If you take your finger, and I'm drawing this box, one
Hmm.
line across, 5 seconds breathing in, the next line down, 5 seconds hold, the next line over, 5 seconds breathing out, and then the next side up is 5 seconds holding. And so you're making this box. Now, I just used 5 seconds. I think that it can be, I've heard 7, 8. I mean, I don't know that part matters so much.
Yeah.
What you want it to be is enough time that you're slowing your breath down.
Yes.
And that's exactly what it's doing. Now, there is an app. It's called Box Breathe.
Hmm.
And so I've talked to people who find that to be very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And so there's also one called I Breathe, which I put on my phone, and I have to acknowledge I have not used it yet. It's just because I've got a lot
Uh-huh.
going on too.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is so it's almost, if I had a shape, it'd be triangle breathing maybe.
Okay.
Inhale for 4 seconds,
Yep.
hold for 7 seconds, exhale for 8 seconds,
Okay.
which is tending to just slow yourself up. So those are two types of breath work that I think it's probably pretty easy for people to learn and to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And these apps, at least iBreath, I'm pretty sure there was no cost to it.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
But
actually, if you go to YouTube, you're going to find probably 100 different videos that are going to teach you how to do this. And so you don't necessarily need an app. I think the only reason you have an app is it's got a timer so that you don't have to count or watch a clock. It's actually keeping track of the inhale, the hold, the exhale, and the hold again. So that's the reason to have an app. It makes it easy.
Yeah. So Wim Hof, I thought was really interesting. He's also known as the Iceman. And so he's known for apparently taking ice baths for his immune system, which I've never been able to convince myself to do.
Neither have I, but I'll tell you, the research on it is quite amazing.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. I honestly couldn't do it.
I can't either.
That could be a whole nother episode of doing, because there are a lot of people who do that, put themselves into ice baths. It has really positive physical and mental effects for you. But so the Wim Hof method, a lot of people will talk about Wim Hof. He's a Dutch guy. That's his name. And so the positives: strengthens the immune system, reduces inflammation, enhances mental clarity. Now, the strengthening the immune system, that's the ice bath thing. That's that part. But so it has controlled breathing and cold exposure and then a focused mindset. Now, I don't know what the controlled breathing is, but again, what he believes is happening is you're regulating the body's pH levels. But as we talked about before, the way you're doing that is by changing the CO2 in your body. And so that the cold exposure, which at 68, I don't think I'm ever going to try it. I just can't.
I've lived this long. What's the use now?
A gradual adaptation to cold, whether showers or ice bath. I mean, have you ever taken a cold shower? I can't do that.
I took a cold bath one time in high school. Like I filled the water up I filled my tub up with cold water and sat in it. I didn't last very long.
Okay. Part of the deal with the ice bath is that you have so much control over your mind that you can stay there. That's part of it.
Police officers do that, apparently. I was just talking to a training officer a couple weeks ago about this, and they force them, I think, to get in an ice bath. Like that's part of their training, is they have to get in an ice bath, and it's part of learning to control your mind and your body, which is something that police officers certainly need a lot of, because they're in such high stress situations, and you have to have a clear head. But man, I don't know if I could do it.
No, I can't. But so as we said at the start of this episode, really our idea is to get information out there. And if our listeners want more in-depth information, I think that podcast with Jack Feldman is a pretty good place to go. But again, there are going to be a lot if they're interested in box breathing or the physiological side, you can go to YouTube and you're going to find a lot of videos that are going to help you with that. So I would try it. I think that breath work is a real positive for mental and physical health. It's easy. It doesn't cost you anything. And there are no negative side effects. Just be careful you don't hyperventilate too much if you try that one.
And don't do it in your car. If you're doing your breath work in the car, don't try hyperventilating.
Don't do the hyperventilation. No.
But do practice just mindful breathing. That's, I mean, if you're a commuter and you struggle to find 30 minutes a day, there's your 30 minutes.
You can do it in your car.
You absolutely can. And, you can change it up, or just, again, it's really just that simple matter of focusing on the breath. It's amazing what it can do. So in conclusion, breathing can't cure anxiety and depression, but it can cure death.
That's right. But I think it can really lessen the symptoms of depression and anxiety.
It can. And I really don't want to minimize anybody's struggle with anxiety and depression, because I understand how difficult and crippling that can be. But breathing, again, it's one of those things, it's not going to have any drawback if you try it.
No. That's right.
There's only benefit.
And make a regular practice of it daily.
Yes. Consistency. Okay. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. So next week, we are going to get into women's expectations. And this comes from another episode of Jimmy on relationships and just talking about why women expect more from men in this day and age.
I have a lot of ideas on that.
Oh, so do I. Yeah. So it's going to be a good episode. I'll give the disclaimer now. We don't hate men.
No, we don't.
So I'm just going to throw that out there now because, I think sometimes people do get negative towards men in these kinds of conversations, and that's not our goal. I think it's more just about information. So,
right.
All right. We will see you all next week.
Goodbye, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.